Part 1. The small town where everything began was not a place where news traveled quietly. Whenever something even a little unusual happened, the whole neighborhood seemed to talk about it within minutes. That was exactly what happened when people discovered that a maid named Lena had suddenly inherited an old, abandoned home on the edge of town. The news spread so fast that by the time Lena even understood what had happened, the town had already formed its own opinions about it. Lena had worked most of her life cleaning houses for families who were well off. She never complained, never argued, and never tried to impress anyone. She simply did her work and returned home to her daughter, Isla. Their life was simple. Their income was enough to survive but not enough to live comfortably. Still, they shared a small bond built of quiet understanding and love. Isla had grown up hearing whispers about her. Kids at school sometimes pointed at her shoes, her clothes, or the old backpack she used. She learned to stay quiet and focus on her studies. She knew her mother worked hard, and she didn't want to add more weight to her shoulders. But even though she stayed calm on the outside, inside she felt the sting of every rude comment. So when people in the town learned that Lena had inherited a house, instead of feeling happy for her, many treated it like a joke. Several neighbors smiled fake smiles. Others whispered things like, "What will they do with that useless place?" Or, "That house is falling apart. It's more trouble than it's worth." A few even laughed openly, shaking their heads as if the inheritance was some kind of comedy. Isla heard the comments everywhere. At the grocery store, someone said, "The maid's daughter is acting like she won the lottery." Another person answered, "Let her dream. The house is probably full of rats." At school, the whispers were even louder. Some kids teased her, asking if she planned to live with ghosts now. Isla didn't reply. She simply walked away, pretending not to care. When she returned home that afternoon, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a single sheet of paper. Lena held it gently, like it was something fragile, something she wasn't sure she deserved. Isla placed her bag aside and asked softly, "Is it really ours?" Lena nodded slowly. "So they say. It's from a distant relative. I barely remember him. I didn't expect anything like this. I don't know why he left it to me." Isla sat beside her. "Maybe he wanted you to have something. Maybe he trusted you." Lena offered a small smile, but it was filled with confusion. "People are talking. They think it is a burden. Maybe they are right. Abandoned places are hard to fix." Isla reached out and held her mother's hand. "We don't know until we see it. We should go. At least once." Took Lena a long moment to nod. "You're right. We should." The next morning, they walked to the far edge of town where the abandoned home stood. The road became quieter the closer they got. Most people didn't go that way anymore. Trees hung over the path, and wind moved through the leaves like a whisper guiding them forward. When they finally reached the property, both of them stopped. The house was bigger than they imagined. It wasn't pretty, at least not from a distance. The walls were faded, and the paint had peeled away in several places. One of the windows was cracked. Vines grew around the porch like nature was trying to take the house back. Lena let out a breath. "It looks worse than I thought." Isla, strangely, felt something else. Yes, the house was old and lonely, but there was also something mysterious about it. Something that made her want to walk closer. "Let's just go inside. We came this far." Her mother nodded, though with hesitation. They climbed the old wooden steps of the porch, each board creaking under their weight. The front door was slightly stuck, but after a push, it opened with a long, dragging sound. Inside, the air was still. Dust floated gently in the sunlight that broke through the curtains. Old furniture stood untouched, covered with white sheets that made the room look like it was frozen in time. A large fireplace dominated the main room, its stones darkened with age. Lena wrapped her arms around herself. "No one has lived here for many years." Isla walked deeper into the room, touching one of the sheets. "It feels like someone left in a hurry, or maybe they just didn't come back." They explored slowly, room by room. A kitchen with old wooden cabinets. A hallway with pictures removed from the walls, leaving behind pale rectangles. A bedroom with a cracked mirror leaning against the dresser. Everything felt old, but nothing felt dangerous. Felt abandoned, yes, but not ruined. Then Isla noticed something unusual. At the far end of the hallway, there was a door that looked different from the others. It was made of heavier wood, and a large metal key hung from a small hook beside it. The hook seemed oddly clean, as if someone had placed the key there much later. "What's that room?" Isla asked. Lena shook her head. "I don't know." Isla stepped closer, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the key. Something about that door made her heart beat a little faster. Not with fear, but with curiosity. "Should we open it?" Lena hesitated. "Maybe we should leave it for another day. We don't know what's inside." But Isla gently said, "We're already here. Let's see everything." Lena finally nodded. Isla lifted the heavy key and slid it into the lock. The sound of the metal turning echoed through the hallway, louder than she expected. She pushed the door open slowly. The air that came out was cool and smelled different from the rest of the house. The room beyond was dark. Isla reached for the wall, finding a switch. When she turned it on, a soft yellow light filled the space. Her eyes widened. This wasn't just another room. It was a basement studio. Not a messy one either. The space was organized, almost like someone had cared for it before leaving. Tables stood neatly arranged. Shelves lined the walls. And in the center of the room were paintings, dozens of them, covered with cloth but carefully placed. Isla walked forward, her footsteps slow, her heart steady. She lifted the edge of one cloth just enough to peek beneath it. What she saw made her breath catch. Portrait. Not just any portrait. A portrait of her mother when she was young, maybe 12 or 13 years old. Isla lowered the cloth gently. "Mom, you need to see this." Lena stepped into the room, her eyes filled with confusion. But when she saw the uncovered painting, she froze. Her hand rose slowly to her mouth. Why would he paint me?" she whispered. Isla looked at the room again. "This house isn't just abandoned. Someone cared about it. Someone cared about you." Lena stared at the painting for a long moment, her eyes softening. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. And Isla, for the first time, felt something she hadn't felt since the inheritance was announced. Hope. She didn't know what they would find next. She didn't know what secrets the house still held. But she knew one thing. The people who mocked her were wrong. This house wasn't a burden. It was the beginning of something they were meant to discover. Part 2. The room remained silent for a long moment as Lena stood there staring at the portrait of herself as a young girl. The soft yellow light from the ceiling lamp made the colors on the canvas glow gently, almost as if the painting was alive. She touched her fingertips to the edge of the wooden frame, scared to press any harder, like she feared the portrait might disappear if she blinked too long. Isla watched her, staying completely still. She didn't want to interrupt the moment. Something about the studio felt sacred, like they had stepped into a chapter of someone else's life that was never meant to be forgotten. Finally, Lena whispered, "I didn't know he remembered me. I don't even know if he really knew me." Isla stepped closer. "Maybe he watched over you from afar. Maybe he felt connected to you somehow." Lena slowly nodded but didn't say anything more. Her eyes kept drifting around the room, taking in every tiny detail. The brushes left in a glass jar, the stacks of blank canvases leaning against the wall, the shelves filled with old sketchbooks and sealed boxes. Isla walked to one of the shelves and picked up a small book. The cover was dark brown, the corners worn, and a thin layer of dust rested on top. She brushed it off with her sleeve and flipped it open. Inside were pages filled with pencil drawings, landscapes, faces, houses, random objects. Some sketches were rough, some were detailed, but all of them had something in common. They were drawn with care. She turned the book around to show her mother. "He was talented." Lena gave a soft nod. "He always drew. That's what I remember. He used to sit outside in the yard, sketching the trees or the sky. I thought he was just quiet. I didn't understand that he lived in his own world." Isla placed the sketchbook on the table and began removing the cloth coverings from some of the larger paintings. Each one told a different story. One showed the town square, painted years before Isla was even born. Another showed a small boy with a kite. Another showed an old woman selling fruit from a wooden cart. But one painting stood out. It was larger than the others, leaned against the far wall. When Isla pulled the cloth away, she gasped. It was a painting of Lena's childhood home. Not just any version of it, but a perfect memory of how it looked decades ago. Fresh paint, tidy garden, bright windows. It was painted in warm colors, almost glowing. Lena stepped forward, her breath catching in her throat. "I can't believe this." Isla stared at her. "He must have known your family well." Lena closed her eyes for a moment. "Maybe he visited, or maybe he passed by often. I never thought much of it." Then slowly, she opened her eyes again and whispered, "Why would he leave all this to me?" Isla didn't know the answer. The house felt full of questions, but that only made her more determined to explore. She moved toward the back of the studio, where a wooden table was covered in envelopes and loose papers. Some of them were yellowed by age, and others seemed untouched. One envelope, however, caught her attention. It had her mother's name on it. Isla gently picked it up. The handwriting was shaky but careful. "Mom," she said softly, "this letter is for you." Lena turned sharply. "For me?" Isla handed her the envelope. "Yes, your name is written on it." Lena held it with both hands as if it were something precious. After a deep breath, she opened it. The room felt still, as if waiting. Inside was a handwritten letter. Isla watched as Lena's eyes moved slowly across the page. Her expression changed, first confusion, then surprise, then something deeper like old memories resurfacing. When she reached the end of the letter, she pressed her lips together and lowered her hands. "Mom," Isla asked quietly, "what did he say?" Lena swallowed. He explained why he left me the house." She paused, her voice trembling slightly. "He said he spent many years alone. He had family once, but things went wrong. He felt guilty about many choices he made. And he remembered me as someone who brought him comfort when he felt like the world had forgotten him." Isla's eyes softened. "You comforted him?" Lena gave a small nod. "I was a child. I didn't know he felt lonely. I used to sit near him while he drew. I talked too much. I asked silly questions. He probably pretended I wasn't bothering him." She let out a weak laugh. "But he wrote that those little moments helped him more than I ever knew." Isla stepped closer and placed her hand on her mother's arm. "That's why he left you this place. It wasn't random." Lena nodded slowly. "He said he didn't want everything he created to disappear. He hoped someone who cared about life, someone who knew struggle, would take care of it." Isla looked around again. The studio no longer felt like a cold, forgotten room. Felt warm, personal, full of meaning. "We should keep exploring the house," she said gently. "There might be more." Lena wiped her eyes and nodded. "Yes, we should." They left the studio and walked back into the hallway. Now that they had seen what the house held, the place didn't feel as abandoned. It felt like someone had pressed pause on a story that was waiting for them to continue. They moved into another room near the front of the house. It appeared to be a study. A wooden desk stood against the wall, and a tall bookshelf reached almost to the ceiling. Papers were scattered on the desk, notes, receipts, old letters, newspaper clippings. Isla picked up one of the clippings. It was from many years ago and featured an article about local artists. The photo included the man they now realized had been watching over Lena. He stood in front of his paintings, looking both proud and shy. The article described him as talented, quiet, and deeply committed to capturing the town's history in his work. Isla smiled softly. "He was someone important, Mom." Lena nodded. "He was, and no one realized it." They spent the next hour exploring the rest of the house. A small guest room with a tiny window. A dining room with a wooden table that looked handmade. A storage closet filled with old coats and boxes. Every room seemed to hold a memory. When they finally stepped back into the main room, the afternoon sunlight had shifted, casting a warm glow through the window. Dust floated in the light like tiny stars. Isla sat on the old sofa. "I can't believe people laughed at us for coming here." Lena sat beside her. People judge quickly. They don't see beyond the surface. Isla nodded. But they were wrong. Lena looked around the room once more. This place is full of stories. Maybe that's why he wanted us to have it. Isla leaned back, feeling the cushion sink under her weight. Do you think we can save it? Lena took a deep breath. It will be hard, but maybe we can try. Isla smiled. Then let's try. As they sat quietly, a small breeze entered through the cracked window, rustling the curtains. It felt like the house itself was breathing again after years of silence. For the first time since the inheritance was announced, neither of them felt embarrassed or worried. Instead, they felt something different. A beginning. Part 3. The next morning, Isla woke up earlier than usual. She didn't even need an alarm. Her mind was already full of thoughts about the abandoned house they had explored the day before. The studio, the paintings, the letter to her mother. It all felt like part of a story she had accidentally stepped into. A story that wasn't finished yet. She quickly washed her face, tied her hair, and walked to the small kitchen where her mother was preparing tea. Lena seemed quiet, thoughtful, as if her mind was still inside the house they had visited. Did you sleep? Isla asked gently. Lena offered a small smile. I tried. My mind kept remembering things I didn't know I had forgotten. Isla sat down. We should go back today. There's still so much to see. Lena nodded slowly. Yes, we should finish exploring. And maybe clean a bit. The house deserves it. Isla smiled warmly. The house did deserve it. Felt lonely for too long. After a simple breakfast, they packed a few things, a cloth, some water, and a small notebook in case they needed to write anything down. The walk toward the house felt different that day. More hopeful. Less heavy. As they reached the front gate, Isla noticed something odd. The gate wasn't fully closed. She froze for a second. Mom, did we close it yesterday? Lena thought for a moment. I don't remember. We were tired. Isla nodded. Maybe it was just the wind. Still, she pushed the gate open slowly, just in case. Nothing unusual happened. The house stood there exactly as they had left it. Quiet, old, but strangely inviting. They stepped inside and immediately noticed how silent everything was. The dust had settled again, light as powder. The smell of old wood and forgotten memories filled the air. Let's start with the rooms we didn't finish yesterday, Isla suggested. Lena agreed, so they headed toward the right side of the house. There was a room with a door slightly open. When Isla pushed it fully, she found what looked like a storage room. Boxes were stacked everywhere, some labeled, some half open. Isla brushed off one of the labels. Paint supplies, it read. She opened it and found tubes of old paint, brushes, dried colors, and small glass jars. The brushes were stiff, the paint had hardened, but everything looked untouched. Under another box was a small wooden crate. Isla opened it and found a collection of small wooden carvings. Animals, faces, shapes, each one carved with care. She handed one to her mother. Lena turned it in her hand. He was very talented. He didn't just paint. Isla nodded. He created everything with detail, like he lived through his art. They placed the carvings gently back inside, then moved to the next box. This one was heavier. Isla pulled it forward and lifted the lid. Inside were stacks of journals. Old journals. Some tied with string, some loose, some thick, some thin. Isla saw her mother's eyes widen. We should take them to the table, Lena said softly. They carried the journals to the small reading table in the study. Isla unwrapped the string on the first one. The pages inside were filled with writing, dense, long entries in neat handwriting. Isla flipped through a few pages. They were dated almost 30 years ago. This one is from before I was born, Isla said. Lena touched the page gently. He wrote a lot. More than I expected. Isla read a small part aloud, choosing a random entry. Some days I find comfort in painting. Other days, I simply watch the world through the window. The little girl who visits my yard keeps talking about the birds. She doesn't know she makes the air less heavy. Lena's eyes softened. He meant me, when I was little. Isla nodded. He wrote about you. They opened another journal, then another. Some entries talked about the town. Some talked about nature. Some talked about loneliness. Others talked about regret. But slowly, as they flipped through more pages, a pattern emerged. Isla noticed that the painter had written extensively about losing people he loved. Family members who drifted away. Close friends who moved on. A feeling that he was alone long before the world realized it. And then Isla found something that made her stop. A journal entry written in slightly shakier handwriting. She reminds me of the daughter I never had. Always curious. Always kind. I pray she grows into someone strong enough to face the world without fear. Isla read it softly. She looked at her mother. Lena's eyes were full of emotion she didn't know how to name. I didn't know. He thought of me like that. Isla closed the journal gently. He wasn't alone. Not really. You were his light. Lena let out a soft breath, both sad and grateful. I wish I had known. Isla placed her hand on her mother's shoulder. He knew you cared, even when you were just a child. That was enough for him. After a few minutes of silence, they moved on. Isla explored the small hallway near the back of the house. She saw a door she had not noticed before. It was thin, painted the same color as the wall, almost hidden. Mom? There's another room here. Lena walked toward her, and Isla pushed the door open. Inside was a small room with a single table and several boxes stacked neatly. But something else caught their attention. On the table lay a map of the town. A large, hand-drawn map with markings all over it. Little red circles. Blue lines connecting certain points. Dates written next to places. Names of families. Names of streets. What is all this? Isla murmured. Lena leaned closer. It looks like he was tracking something. Isla scanned the map carefully. She recognized some of the places. The school. The park. The river. The bakery near the main road. Then, she noticed something strange. One of the circles was drawn around their own small apartment, the place where she and her mother lived. The date beside it was many years ago. Isla felt her heartbeat quicken. Mom! He circled our old home. Lena stared at the map, trying to understand. Why would he do that? Isla thought for a moment. Maybe he was watching over you. Maybe he kept track of places that mattered to him. Lena touched the map gently. He was lonely. Maybe keeping track of the town made him feel connected. Isla nodded. It's possible. They looked through the boxes under the table. One box contained old bills, letters, and notices. Another box had several unfinished sketches. But the most unusual box contained something wrapped in cloth. Isla unwrapped it. It was a wooden frame. Inside the frame was another painting. A painting of a little girl. Not her mother. Not anyone they recognized immediately. The girl was sitting under a tree, holding a book in her lap, sunlight falling across her hair. Isla stared at it. She seems important. Lena studied the painting. I don't remember anyone who looked like her. Isla turned over the frame, looking for a note or date. On the back, written faintly in pencil, were two words. My memory. Isla whispered. Who was she? They didn't know yet. But Isla felt something inside her shift. The house was not just a building. It was a place full of pieces of someone's life. Pieces he hoped someone would understand. They gently wrapped the painting again and placed it back. Isla turned to her mother. There's more to uncover. More we don't know yet. Lena nodded. Yes, and we will learn it all. One step at a time. Together, they walked back toward the main room. The sunlight had shifted again, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Isla looked around, feeling a quiet determination form inside her. This is not just an abandoned home, she said softly. It's his story. His whole story. Lena smiled gently. And now it's part of ours too. Isla nodded. We'll take care of it. We'll protect what he left. They stood together in the silent house, no longer frightened by its age, no longer bothered by the dust or the broken windows. They felt connected to its past, to its secrets, to the man who once lived there. And deep inside, they both knew this was only the beginning of what they were meant to discover. Part 4 story will be written here in simple English, 1400 words. No heading. The moment she stepped outside the hidden room, she felt as if her entire world had shifted. Everything she had believed about her mother, everything she assumed about the old house, had suddenly opened into a much bigger truth. But she wasn't ready to sit and process it yet. She needed air. She needed space. She needed to understand why her mother had chosen to keep so much hidden. She walked out into the backyard, where the sun had already begun setting. Soft orange light touched the broken walls and dusty windows, almost making the place look warm instead of abandoned. She stood there quietly, letting the soft breeze brush against her face. Her thoughts were loud and messy, but the calm air helped her breathe a little easier. After a few minutes, she walked back toward the house and stepped inside again. She wanted to explore more, to see if anything else was hidden that might explain what she had found. She started with the kitchen. The shelves were empty, except for a few old jars and rusty pots. The smell of old wood was strong, but she didn't mind. She opened every cupboard, every drawer. Nothing. Next, she moved to the living room. There was just one large empty shelf and a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. She wiped the dust from the mirror, but her reflection looked tired and confused. She didn't linger. Then she walked to the storage room beside the stairs. It was filled with boxes, some torn, some sealed tight. She knelt down and opened the first box. Old clothes. A few faded blankets. Nothing unusual. She opened the next one and found more fabric, some folded neatly, some tossed loosely. Again, nothing unusual. But the third box made her pause. It wasn't clothes. It wasn't blankets. It was old notebooks. She gently picked one up. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed. She opened it expecting random scribbles or maybe old recipes. But instead, she saw handwriting she recognized, her mother's. A soft breath escaped her. She sat on the floor and began reading. The first page described her mother's early days working in the house. How hard it had been at first. How strict the owner had seemed. How lonely the halls felt at night. But as she read further, she saw the tone slowly shift. Her mother wrote about how the old owner, an elderly woman who lived mostly by herself, had begun trusting her. How the woman would open up sometimes, share stories from her younger days. How she would talk about the years she spent traveling, the people she met, the dreams she once had. The book spoke of kindness, of connection, of a bond that grew quietly but steadily. She flipped pages slowly, feeling as if she were stepping into her mother's past. The entries were short but full of emotion. She could tell her mother had once felt safe here, maybe even valued. Then she reached a page where the writing changed. The words became heavier. Her mother wrote about how the owner had grown weak, how she had stopped eating as much, how she would sit in the backyard for long hours, staring at nothing. One entry said, "She tells me she doesn't want her relatives to take this house. She says they only want its value, not its history, not the memories. I don't know why she trusts me with this thought, but she does. And I don't know why I feel responsible for protecting it." Another entry said, "She keeps telling me I remind her of someone she loved once. I never ask who, but she smiles in a way that makes me feel seen." The young woman reading the notebook felt her chest tighten. She continued turning the pages, each one revealing more of her mother's hidden world. Eventually, she reached an entry that made her sit still for a long moment. "Today she called me to her room. She looked tired but peaceful. She held my hand and said she didn't have many days left. I didn't know what to say, so I just sat with her. Then she told me she had changed her will. She said she didn't want the house to fall into the wrong hands. She wanted me to have it." I cried. I begged her not to do it. I told her it would cause problems. But she just smiled and said, "You'll understand one day." Tears blurred her vision slightly as she read the rest. She told me something else today, something that shook me. She told me this house carries more than memories. She said something inside it belongs to me, but she wouldn't say what. She just said I would find it when I was ready. She stopped reading and closed her eyes. The weight of those words pressed against her heart. Her mother had known something important was hidden here, something meant for her daughter. Carefully, she placed the notebook aside and opened the next one. This one was older. The writing was faint in some places. But as she read, she noticed the entries were shorter and more hurried. One page read, "Her relatives keep visiting. They speak in whispers when they think I can't hear them. They want the house. They're waiting. I have to be careful." Another said, "They asked her again if she had signed the documents they brought. She refused. I don't know what they're planning, but I fear it will not end well." The entries grew more intense. "She collapsed today. I called for help, but when they came, their faces didn't show concern. They looked relieved. I don't trust them. I don't trust anything about them." The last entry made her heart drop. She told me again, "Promise me you'll protect the house. Promise me you'll protect what's inside." I promised, but I don't know if I can keep that promise. The young woman closed the notebook gently. Her hands were slightly trembling. This was more than she expected, more than she could have imagined. But she wasn't done searching yet. She picked up another box. Inside, she found old letters, some sealed, some torn open. She recognized the handwriting from the notebooks, but some envelopes carried different names, names she'd never heard. She opened one letter and began reading. It spoke of a friendship between the old owner and someone she had known since childhood. There were details about promises, regrets, lost connections. But one line in particular stood out. "I will leave something behind for the one who reminds me of you. Something you once wanted to protect." She read it again slowly, then again. What did that mean? She lifted another letter. This one was more emotional. It spoke of a child who had been a secret to almost everyone. Someone the old owner cared deeply for but never revealed publicly. Her pulse quickened. The letter ended with, "I hope one day they will understand my choices." She felt a sudden chill run through her. Her hands shook slightly, and the letters nearly slipped from her fingers. But before panic could rise, she heard a sound. A soft knock. She turned sharply toward the front door. She wasn't expecting anyone. She hadn't told anyone she was here. The knock came again, louder this time. She slowly stood up. Her heart thudded in her chest. She wiped her hands on her clothes, trying to steady her breathing. She walked toward the door, each step slow and cautious. When she finally reached it, she hesitated. Who could it be at this hour? She placed her hand on the doorknob. Her fingers tightened around it. She turned it slowly and opened the door halfway. A man stood outside, someone from the village. She recognized him faintly. He had come earlier that morning when people gathered to watch her arrive. I'm sorry to disturb you," he said softly, "but I thought you should know something." She frowned slightly. "What is it?" He looked around nervously before he spoke again. "Someone else is coming for the house, and they're not happy you're here." Her heart sank. The silence between them grew heavy. The man lowered his voice. "I thought you needed to be warned. They don't believe you deserve this place, and they won't back off easily." She swallowed, feeling the weight of everything that had happened today press down even harder. But instead of fear, something else rose inside her. Strength. She straightened her back slightly. "Thank you for telling me," she said quietly. He nodded, stepped back, and walked away. She closed the door gently behind her. She stood alone in the quiet hallway, surrounded by old memories, hidden truths, and rising tension. And she knew one thing for certain. Whatever her mother had wanted her to find, whatever secret the old owner had left behind, it wasn't something small, and she wasn't backing away. Not now. Not after coming this far. Part 5 story will be written here in simple English, 1400 words. No heading. The house felt completely different the next morning. The air was still, but not in a lonely or abandoned way. It carried a kind of quiet focus, like it was waiting for her to take the next step. She woke up early, long before the sun fully rose, unable to stop thinking about the warning the man had given her the night before. Someone was coming. Someone who believed the house should be theirs. Someone willing to cause trouble. She sat on the old couch in the living room, running her fingers over the faded fabric. The notebooks lay beside her, neatly stacked, and the letters she had found were spread across the table. She had spent most of the night reading them again and again, trying to understand the old owner's thoughts, intentions, and deeply kept secrets. There was still something missing, a final piece, something her mother and the old owner had both hinted at, something hidden inside the house. She stood slowly and walked toward the hallway. The floor creaked under her feet, but she didn't mind it anymore. The sounds of the house were becoming familiar, almost comforting. She reached the hidden room again, the one she had discovered the day before. She stepped inside and took a deep breath. The room was small, quiet, and filled with dust, but she could feel there was more to it than what she had already found. She began checking the walls carefully. She pressed her hands against each wooden panel, looking for anything unusual. After a few minutes, her fingers brushed over a section that felt slightly different. Not looser exactly, but hollow. She leaned closer. There was a faint line, almost invisible unless someone looked very closely. She pressed gently against it. Nothing. Then she pressed again, harder this time. A soft click echoed. Her heart jumped. The small wooden panel shifted slightly. She pulled it open with cautious hands. Inside was a narrow space, almost like a hidden pocket built into the wall. And in that space, she found a wooden box. It was old but beautifully carved, with patterns that looked carefully done by hand. She lifted it out gently, dust falling off in tiny clouds. The box wasn't heavy, but it carried a sense of importance. She sat cross-legged on the floor and placed it in front of her. For a moment she hesitated. Her fingers hovered above the lid. Then she slowly opened it. Inside was a stack of papers tied together with a thin ribbon. Beneath them lay a tiny velvet pouch. She picked up the papers first and untied the ribbon. The first page nearly took her breath away. It was a signed document. Not a will. Not a letter. It was a record of ownership. The old owner's signature was at the bottom. And next to it, a second signature. Her mother's. Her throat tightened. She turned the next page. It explained that the old owner had officially transferred the house to her mother long before she passed away. Not out of sudden charity. Not out of guilt or pity. But because the house had belonged to someone the old owner loved deeply. Someone connected to her mother in a way no one had ever known. The next page explained everything. The old owner had once been engaged many years ago, but life had pulled them apart. Her fiancé had gone on to live a quiet life, marry someone else and have a family. The old owner had never reached out again. But she had found out later that her former fiancé had passed away early. And his child, her mother's father, never knew she existed. The old owner had spent years trying to figure out whether to reveal the truth. But when she met her mother, she felt an instant connection. A strange familiarity. And eventually, she discovered why. Her mother was her lost fiancé's granddaughter. The house wasn't just a gift. It was inheritance. Family home. Something passed down from a past filled with love, regret, and memories no one else had known. The young woman reading the papers felt her eyes sting. She pressed her lips together and let the emotions wash over her quietly. All the insults, all the mocking, all the judgment she had faced. None of it meant anything now. This house was her family's legacy. She turned the last page slowly. It was a short note written in a shaky hand. If you are reading this, then the truth has finally reached you. I hope you welcome this home with the same heart your mother once did. Protect it. Let it protect you. The past may have been painful, but the future is yours. Her chest felt full, heavy but also warm. She wiped her eyes gently, took a slow breath, and reached for the small velvet pouch inside the box. She opened it. Inside was a tiny locket. She opened the locket carefully. Inside were 2 old photographs. One of the old owner in her youth, smiling softly, and one of a man who resembled her mother in ways she couldn't ignore. She closed the locket and held it tightly. She finally understood why her mother hadn't wanted to talk about the past. She wasn't hiding shame. She was protecting something delicate, something complicated, something tied to family history that had been messy and fragile. The young woman placed everything back in the box gently. She sat quietly for a long moment, letting herself breathe, letting the truth settle. But then she remembered the man's warning from last night. Someone was coming. Someone who believed they had a right to this place. She stood and walked out of the hidden room, carrying the wooden box with her. The house felt less confusing now, less heavy. The secrets weren't weighing her down anymore. They were lifting her. She stepped into the living room and stopped. There were voices outside. Her breath caught. She walked to the window and peeked out. A group of people were gathered near the front gate. 3 adults, all dressed in clean, expensive-looking clothes. Their expressions were sharp, irritated, almost angry. She recognized 2 of them from pictures she had seen in the letters. They were the old owner's distant relatives, the ones who wanted the house. She stepped back from the window just as someone knocked on the door, hard. She closed her eyes briefly to steady herself, then walked to the door and opened it just halfway. A woman stood at the front, her chin lifted high. "So it's true," the woman said sharply. "You're here, trying to claim something that doesn't belong to you." The young woman stayed calm. "This house was given to my mother, and then to me." The woman scoffed. "Given? Your mother tricked an old woman. We all know what really happened." Before she could respond, she heard the sound of cars stopping near the gate. She turned. A second group was approaching. Some were neighbors. Some were people from the village. Some she didn't even know. They walked in quietly and gathered behind her, offering silent support. The man who warned her last night stepped forward. "She isn't alone," he said simply. The relatives looked annoyed, but also frustrated. This wasn't going the way they had planned. The woman folded her arms. "You have no proof. You can't claim anything without legal documents." The young woman took a breath. Then she lifted the wooden box. "I found everything," she said softly. "Her will, her letters, and the truth about my family. My mother didn't take advantage of anyone. This house was ours long before any of you cared about it." The relatives went silent. The woman reached out as if she wanted to grab the box, but one of the villagers stepped forward, blocking her path and shaking his head. "Leave her alone," he said. Another villager added, "Her mother worked here with dignity and loyalty." Everyone knew that. The relatives exchanged glances, uncertain, stiff, embarrassed. Finally, the woman spoke again, her voice smaller than before. "We didn't know about any of this. Now you do," the young woman said quietly. "And I'm not giving up my family's home." The silence that followed was heavy. But this time it wasn't fearful. It was final. The relatives looked at each other, defeated. They backed away slowly, walked toward their car, and left without another word. The villagers stayed behind for a moment. Some smiled. Some simply nodded in respect. They didn't say much, but their presence alone was enough. After everyone left, the young woman closed the door softly behind her. She stood in the center of the living room, holding the wooden box against her chest. For the first time since she arrived, the house felt warm, safe, hers. Not because someone handed it to her, but because she finally understood the story behind it. She walked to the backyard, where the last light of day touched the walls gently. She stood there in the quiet, feeling peace settle into her heart. Her mother's voice echoed softly in her mind, words she once said long ago. "One day, you'll understand why some things are worth protecting." She understood now, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, she made a quiet promise to herself. She would protect the house. She would honor its past. She would build a future here, because this wasn't just an abandoned home. It was her family's story, and she was finally ready to continue it.